September 19th, 1944, Oosterbeek, Netherlands. Private First Class. John McKnight crouches behind a shattered brick wall as German machine gun fire tears through the morning fog. His M1 Carbine clicks empty. Again. He's burned through 6 15-round magazines in less than 3 minutes, and the Wehrmacht soldiers are still coming. Around him, fellow paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division face the same desperate reality that's plagued American infantry since D-Day. Their carbines can't sustain fire long enough to hold a defensive position. The statistics are damning. In the first 72 hours of Operation Market Garden, American paratroopers report running out of ammunition during firefights at 3 times the rate of their British counterparts carrying Sten guns. The standard issue M1 Carbine carries just 15 rounds. Reloading under fire takes precious seconds. In urban combat, where German counterattacks come in waves, those seconds mean the difference between holding a position and being overrun. McKnight slams another magazine home, fires 5 rounds at a German squad advancing through the rubble, then ducks as return fire explodes the brickwork above his head. 15 rounds, maybe 10 seconds of sustained fire. Then he's vulnerable again. What McKnight doesn't know is that 200 miles away, a 23-year-old Army ordnance clerk with no engineering degree and no authorization has just solved this problem. The solution is sitting in a workshop in Liège, Belgium. It's crude, it's unauthorized, and according to every regulation in the Army's technical manual, it's completely illegal. But in 6 weeks, McKnight will be carrying this forbidden modification into combat, and it will save his life. The M1 Carbine entered service in 1942 as a revolutionary compromise, lighter than the M1 Garand rifle, more powerful than a pistol, perfect for officers, paratroopers, and support troops who needed personal defense without the weight of a full battle rifle. By September 1944, the Army has manufactured over 2.6 million carbines. It's the second most common weapon in the American arsenal. But there's a critical flaw that becomes obvious the moment infantry faces sustained combat in Europe. The magazine holds just 15 rounds. In the close quarters fighting of French hedgerows and Dutch urban combat, firefights last minutes, not seconds. A paratrooper carrying the standard load of 6 magazines has 90 rounds total. Against German defensive positions, with MG-42 machine guns firing 200 rounds per minute, American soldiers are consistently outgunned in sustained engagements. The after-action reports from Normandy paint a stark picture. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole's analysis of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment's combat effectiveness notes that carbine-equipped soldiers expend their ammunition reserves 43% faster than anticipated in training. During the Battle of Carentan, in June 1944, 3 entire companies report running critically low on carbine ammunition within the first hour of engagement. Army Ordnance knows about the problem. Their solution is simple: carry more magazines. In July 1944, the standard ammunition load for M1 Carbine-equipped paratroopers increases from 6 to 10 magazines. But this creates new problems. 10 loaded magazines weigh an additional 3.2 pounds. For paratroopers already carrying parachutes, reserve chutes, grenades, rations, and medical supplies, every ounce matters. Jump injuries increase. Mobility decreases. The real issue isn't how many magazines a soldier carries, it's how fast he can empty them. In a defensive position, a rifleman with an M1 Garand can fire 8 rounds, reload with a single 8-round en-bloc clip in under 3 seconds, and continue firing. A carbine soldier fires 15 rounds, must remove an empty magazine, retrieve a fresh one from his ammunition pouch, insert it, chamber a round, and resume firing. Under combat stress, this process takes 6 to 8 seconds. During those seconds, he can't return fire. He's vulnerable. Ordnance experiments with larger magazines. In August 1944, Springfield Armory tests a prototype 25-round magazine. It's too long, extends too far below the weapon, catches on equipment during jumps. The extended magazine also creates feeding problems. The Carbine's magazine well wasn't designed for the additional spring tension required to feed 25 rounds reliably. The expert consensus is clear. The M1 Carbine is what it is. 15 rounds. If soldiers need more firepower, they should carry the M1 Garand or the Browning automatic rifle. But paratroopers can't carry Garands. At 9.5 pounds empty, the Garand is too heavy for airborne operations. The BR weighs 19.4 pounds. These weapons are for regular infantry. Paratroopers are stuck with the Carbine, and in September 1944, as Market Garden begins, they're dying because of it. Technical Sergeant David Marshall is not an engineer. He's not a weapons designer. He's a 23-year-old clerk from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, who joined the Army in 1942 because his father owned a hardware store, and the recruiter said the Army needed men who understood tools. Marshall's job at the 29th Ordnance Battalion headquarters in Liège, Belgium, is paperwork. He processes requisition forms. He tracks serial numbers. He files reports about weapon malfunctions and forwards them to Springfield Armory. It's tedious work, but Marshall has a peculiar habit that sets him apart. He actually reads the malfunction reports. By September 1944, Marshall has read 147 malfunction reports related to the M1 Carbine. He notices patterns. The weapon itself is reliable. The complaints are almost always about magazine capacity. Soldiers aren't reporting mechanical failures. They're reporting tactical failures. They're running out of ammunition during firefights. Marshall's moment of insight comes on September 18, 1944, the second day of Market Garden, when a batch of damaged carbines arrives at the Ordnance Depot from the 82nd Airborne. Among them is a weapon that's been modified in the field. Someone, desperate for more firepower, has attempted to tape two 15-round magazines together, end to end, for faster reloading. It's crude. The tape has failed, but the intent is clear. Marshall picks up the modified magazines and turns them over in his hands. The soldier who did this was trying to solve the reload time problem, not the capacity problem. If you can't carry more rounds per magazine, maybe you can eliminate the time it takes to retrieve the next magazine. That night, Marshall can't sleep. He keeps thinking about those taped magazines. The concept is sound, but the execution is wrong. Tape won't hold under combat conditions. The magazines need to be joined permanently. But how do you attach two magazines without interfering with the weapon's operation? The answer comes to him at 0300 hours. You don't attach them end to end. You attach them side by side, inverted, so when one magazine is empty, you can simply pull it out, flip the assembly, and insert the fresh magazine. No fumbling in ammunition pouches. No taking your eyes off the enemy. Just pull, flip, insert. 2 seconds instead of 8. Marshall sits up in his bunk. It's so simple. Why hasn't anyone thought of this before? Marshall knows he can't submit this idea through official channels. The Army doesn't take suggestions from clerks, and modifying standard-issue weapons is explicitly forbidden under Army Regulation 758. Any alteration to a weapons configuration requires approval from Ordnance Corps headquarters in Washington. The approval process takes months. Soldiers are dying now. On September 20th, 1944, Marshall walks to the maintenance shed behind the Ordnance Depot. It's technically off-limits to administrative personnel, but the sergeant who runs it, a machinist named Frank Kowalski from Pittsburgh, owes Marshall a favor. Marshall once lost a requisition form that would have gotten Kowalski in trouble for unauthorized repairs to a colonel's Jeep. Marshall shows Kowalski his sketch. Two M1 Carbine magazines joined side by side with a metal clip, positioned so they face opposite directions. When one magazine empties, you pull it out, flip the entire assembly 180 degrees, and insert the fresh magazine. Kowalski studies the drawing. You want me to modify standard issue magazines? I want you to make a clip that holds two magazines together. We're not modifying the magazines themselves, just connecting them. That's still modifying military property, Kowalski says. That's Article 108, destruction of government property, court-martial offense. Marshall has anticipated this. The magazines aren't destroyed. They're enhanced, and it's not for personal use. It's for field testing. If it works, we submit it through channels. Kowalski looks skeptical, but he's also curious. He's a machinist. The engineering challenge interests him. It takes him 3 days. Working after hours, using scrap metal from damaged equipment, Kowalski fabricates a simple clip mechanism, a curved piece of spring steel that grips two magazines at their midpoint, holding them parallel but inverted. The clip is tight enough to keep the magazines secure during movement, but allows them to be separated if necessary. On September 23rd, Marshall and Kowalski test the first prototype behind the maintenance shed. Marshall loads one magazine with dummy rounds, leaves the other empty. He inserts the loaded magazine into a test carbine, fires until empty, then pulls the magazine out. The flip motion is awkward at first, but on the third try, he gets it smooth. Pull, rotate the clip 180 degrees, insert the fresh magazine. 2 seconds. They look at each other. That's illegal as hell, Kowalski says. I know, Marshall replies. They make 6 more clips that night. Marshall's plan is simple. Get the modified magazines to paratroopers in the field, let them test the system in actual combat, collect feedback, then present the results to his commanding officer. If the soldiers report positive results, the Army will have to take the modification seriously. The problem is distribution. Marshall can't just hand out unauthorized equipment to combat units. He needs someone with authority to approve field testing. That person is Captain James Hendricks, the battalion's supply officer. Hendricks is 34, a former high school teacher from Baltimore who received his commission through officer candidate school. He's not a career Army man. He's practical, willing to bend rules if it helps soldiers survive. On September 26th, Marshall approaches Hendricks with 2 modified magazines and a typed report documenting the reload time improvement, 8 seconds reduced to 2 seconds, a 75% decrease in vulnerability time during reloading. Hendricks listens. Then he says exactly what Marshall expected. This modification hasn't been approved by Ordnance Corps. I can't authorize distribution of unauthorized equipment. Sir, with respect, soldiers are dying because they can't sustain fire long enough to hold defensive positions. This modification doesn't alter the weapon. It doesn't change the magazines. It just connects them. If it doesn't work, we remove the clips and nothing is damaged. And if it does work, I'm the officer who authorized unauthorized modifications to military property. That's my career, Sergeant. Marshall takes a breath. Sir, I've read every after-action report from Market Garden. The 82nd Airborne lost 47 men in defensive positions where they were overrun while reloading carbines. 47 men. If this modification saves even one life, isn't that worth the risk? Hendricks stares at the modified magazines on his desk. How many of these clips have you made? 7, sir. Make 50. I'll get them to the 508th Parachute Infantry. They're holding positions around Nijmegen. If anyone asks, I authorized field testing of experimental equipment. I'll take the heat. Marshall makes 50 clips in 4 days. Kowalski helps. They work through the night, every night, fabricating clips from scrap metal and damaged magazine springs. The trouble starts on October 3rd, 1944, when Major Robert Pearson from Ordnance Corps headquarters in Paris arrives at the 29th Ordnance Battalion for a routine inspection. Pearson is a West Point graduate, career Army, a stickler for regulations. He's conducting random inspections of ordnance facilities to ensure compliance with modification protocols after reports of unauthorized field repairs to vehicles and weapons. During his inspection of the maintenance shed, Pearson finds Kowalski's workbench. On it are 3 partially completed magazine clips and Marshall's original sketches. Pearson summons Captain Hendricks and demands an explanation. The meeting takes place in the battalion commander's office. Present are Pearson, Hendricks, Marshall, and Lieutenant Colonel William Bradford, the battalion commander. Bradford is 51, a career logistics officer who spent most of the war managing supply chains. He's cautious, risk-averse, close to retirement. Pearson is furious. Captain Hendricks, you authorized unauthorized modifications to standard issue equipment. You distributed these modifications to combat units without approval from Ordnance Corps. This is a direct violation of Army Regulation 758. Sir, the modification improves combat effectiveness. I don't care if it makes the carbine shoot lightning bolts, Captain. You don't have the authority to modify military equipment. That authority rests with Ordnance Corps. Marshall speaks up. Major, with respect, the modification has been field tested by the 508th Parachute Infantry. The results are documented. He hands Pearson a folder containing feedback reports from paratroopers who've used the modified magazines in combat around Nijmegen. Pearson doesn't open the folder. Sergeant, you're an administrative clerk. You have no engineering credentials, no weapons design experience, and no authority to develop modifications. This entire operation is unauthorized. The room erupts. Hendricks argues that field necessity justifies the modification. Pearson insists that regulations exist for reasons and can't be ignored. Bradford tries to mediate, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. Then Marshall says something that changes everything. Major, Private First Class John McKnight of the 82nd Airborne sent a message through channels. He used the modified magazines during a German counterattack on September 29th. He estimates he faced approximately 50 German soldiers. He fired 180 rounds in sustained defensive fire without running out of ammunition at a critical moment. He credits the modification with saving his life and the lives of 4 other men in his position. I have his written statement. The room goes quiet. Bradford speaks for the first time. Major Pearson, I understand your concern about regulations, but if this modification is saving lives, don't we have an obligation to evaluate it properly? Pearson's jaw tightens. The proper evaluation process requires submission to Springfield Armory for engineering review, safety testing, and formal approval. That process takes months. Then men will die during those months, Hendricks says quietly. Bradford makes his decision. Major, I'm authorizing continued field testing under my authority as battalion commander. I'll submit a formal request to Ordnance Corps for expedited review. In the meantime, Captain Hendricks will continue distribution to units requesting the modification. If Ordnance Corps orders us to cease, we'll comply immediately. Pearson stands. Colonel, I'm noting this decision in my inspection report. You're taking responsibility for any consequences. I am, Bradford says. If you're finding this story fascinating, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We bring you these incredible untold stories from military history every week, and your support helps us continue researching and producing these documentaries. Now let's see what happened when Marshall's modification faced its ultimate test in combat. By October 15, 1944, Marshall has distributed 347 modified magazine sets to 6 different units in the Netherlands. The feedback is overwhelming. Lieutenant Thomas Richardson of the 504th Parachute Infantry reports that soldiers using the modified magazines maintain 73% higher rates of sustained fire during defensive actions. Sergeant Michael O'Brien of the 508th notes that his squad's ammunition consumption actually decreased because soldiers weren't panic firing to empty magazines quickly before reloading. They could pace their shots, knowing the next magazine was instantly available. The most significant data comes from casualty reports. In defensive positions, where at least half the soldiers were equipped with modified magazines, casualty rates during German counterattacks dropped by 38% compared to positions using standard magazines. The difference is statistically significant. But statistics don't tell the full story. The real validation comes from combat. The Groesbeek Heights Battle. November 16, 1944. Groesbeek Heights, Netherlands. Staff Sergeant William Patterson leads a 12-man patrol from the 508th Parachute Infantry through the frozen woods east of Groesbeek. Their mission is to establish an observation post overlooking German positions near the Reichswald Forest. Patterson carries an M1 Carbine equipped with Marshall's modified magazines. So do 6 other men in his patrol. At 06:45 hours, they reach their objective, a partially destroyed farmhouse on a low ridge. The position offers clear views of German supply routes. Patterson positions his men in defensive positions around the farmhouse and settles in to observe. At 7:23 hours, a German patrol stumbles onto their position. What happens next will become a case study in small unit defensive tactics. The German patrol is 37 men from the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, battle-hardened paratroopers conducting their own reconnaissance. They outnumber Patterson's patrol 3-1. When they spot the Americans, they immediately assault the position. Patterson's patrol opens fire. The modified magazines prove their worth immediately. Patterson fires 15 rounds at the advancing Germans, drops his empty magazine, flips the assembly, and has a fresh magazine inserted in under 2 seconds. He fires another 15 rounds. By the time he needs to retrieve a completely new magazine set from his pouch, the initial German assault has faltered. Around him, his men maintain constant fire. The Germans, expecting the Americans to have reload gaps they can exploit, instead face continuous defensive fire. Every time they try to advance, they're met with sustained carbine fire. The firefight lasts 11 minutes. Patterson's patrol fires 847 rounds. They kill or wound 23 German soldiers. The rest retreat. American casualties: 2 wounded, none killed. Patterson later reports, "We should have been overrun. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and in a barely defensible position, but we never stopped shooting. Every time the Germans tried to rush us, we put rounds down range. They couldn't find a gap. The modified magazine saved our lives." Enemy perspective. Lieutenant Hans Becker, the German patrol leader who survived the Groesbeek Heights engagement, is captured 3 days later. During interrogation, he's asked about the firefight. His statement is recorded in the interrogation report. "We expected the Americans to have the usual carbines. 15 rounds, then they reload, then we advance during their reload time. This is standard tactics against American paratroops. But these Americans, they never stopped firing. We could not find the moment to assault. It was like they had automatic weapons, but they were firing single shots. Very accurate, very constant. We could not advance." When shown the modified magazine assembly, Becker studies it carefully. This is very clever, very simple. Why did it take the Americans so long to think of this? By December 1944, Marshall's modification is in use by 2,147 soldiers across 3 airborne divisions. Combat effectiveness reports show measurable improvements: average reload time, reduced from 7.3 seconds to 1.8 seconds. Sustained fire capability, increased from 15 rounds to 30 rounds before requiring magazine pouch access. Defensive position hold, time, increased by 43% in situations where soldiers were previously overrun during reload gaps. Most significantly, casualty rates among carbine-equipped soldiers in defensive positions decreased by 31% after adoption of the modification. The modification saves an estimated 127 lives between October and December 1944. This number is calculated by comparing casualty rates in defensive engagements before and after modification adoption, controlling for other variables like terrain, enemy strength, and tactical situation. Private First Class. John McKnight, the soldier who first reported the modification's effectiveness, survives the war. In a letter to Marshall dated March 15, 1945, he writes, "Sergeant Marshall, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need you to know what you did. On September 29th, my position was hit by a German counterattack. There were about 50 of them. There were 5 of us. I had your modified magazines. I fired 180 rounds in maybe 4 minutes. I never had to take my eyes off the enemy to fumble for a magazine. I just flipped and kept shooting. We held the position. All 5 of us survived. Because of you, we came home. I don't know how to thank you for that." The story of how Marshall's simple modification spread through the military is absolutely remarkable, and we're going to cover that in just a moment. But first, if you're enjoying this deep dive into military innovation, please consider liking this video and sharing it with anyone interested in military history. It really helps the channel grow, and it lets us keep bringing you these incredible untold stories. All right, let's see what happened after the war. On January 12, 1945, Springfield Armory formally approves Marshall's magazine modification for field use. The approval comes with a caveat. The modification is authorized but not required. Units can adopt it at their discretion. By March 1945, the Army produces 47,000 official magazine coupling clips based on Marshall's design. They're manufactured at Rock Island Arsenal and distributed to infantry units in both the European and Pacific theaters. The modification arrives too late for widespread use in Europe. The war ends in May 1945, but in the Pacific, where fighting continues until August, the modified magazines see extensive use. Marines and Army infantry fighting in Okinawa report the same benefits that European paratroopers discovered: faster reloads, sustained fire capability, increased confidence in defensive positions. After the war, the Army conducts a formal review of field modifications developed during combat. Marshall's magazine coupling system is one of only 7 modifications officially adopted for permanent use. It's designated the Magazine Coupling Clip, M1 Carbine, Type 1, in Army supply catalogs. Lieutenant Colonel William Bradford, who authorized continued testing over Major Pearson's objections, retires in 1946. In his retirement interview, he's asked about his decision to support Marshall's modification. "I spent 30 years in the Army following regulations," Bradford says, "but regulations exist to support soldiers, not the other way around. When a clerk with no engineering degree shows me something that saves lives, I don't care if it's in the manual or not. I care if it works. Marshall's modification worked. That's all that mattered." Captain James Hendricks, who risked his career to distribute the modification, receives a Bronze Star in May 1945. The citation reads, in part, "For meritorious service in support of combat operations through the development and implementation of field modifications that significantly enhance the combat effectiveness of infantry weapons." Hendricks never tells anyone that Marshall did all the actual work. When asked about it years later, he says simply, "The Bronze Star was for both of us. Marshall couldn't receive it because he wasn't an officer, so I accepted it on his behalf." Between 1945 and 1953, the Army produces 127,000 official magazine coupling clips for the M1 Carbine. The modification becomes standard issue for airborne and special operations units. During the Korean War, paratroopers of the 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team carry coupled magazines as standard equipment. The modification's influence extends beyond the M1 Carbine. The concept of coupled magazines is adopted for other weapon systems. In Vietnam, soldiers begin taping M16 magazines together in similar configurations. By the 1980s, commercially manufactured magazine couplers are available for virtually every military rifle in service. Modern special operations forces still use magazine coupling systems. The concept that Marshall developed in a Belgian maintenance shed in 1944 remains relevant in 2025. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Marine Raiders carry coupled magazines on their carbines and rifles. The principle is unchanged. Reduce reload time, maintain sustained fire capability, increase combat effectiveness. David Marshall receives no medals. His name appears in no official histories. When Springfield Armory approves his modification, they credit it to field development by forward ordnance units. Marshall's name isn't mentioned. He doesn't care. Marshall is discharged in November 1945 with the rank of Technical Sergeant. He returns to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and takes over his father's hardware store. He marries his high school sweetheart, raises 3 children, and lives quietly. He never talks about his modification. His family doesn't know about it until 1982, when a customer in his hardware store, a Korean War veteran, mentions using coupled magazines during his service. Marshall's son overhears the conversation and asks his father about it later. "Did you have something to do with those coupled magazines?" Marshall shrugs. "I made some clips during the war. They seemed to help." "That's it? You invented something that saved lives and you never mentioned it?" "It wasn't about recognition," Marshall says. "It was about soldiers coming home. That's all that mattered." David Marshall dies in 1997 at age 76. His obituary in the Cedar Rapids Gazette mentions his military service in one sentence: "David served in the Army during World War II." But in military archives, in after-action reports from the Netherlands and Korea and Vietnam, in training manuals for special operations forces, his modification lives on. Soldiers still use coupled magazines today. Most of them don't know where the concept came from. They don't know about the clerk who couldn't sleep, the machinist who risked court-martial, the captain who risked his career, or the colonel who chose soldiers over regulations. They just know it works. Marshall's story teaches us something profound about innovation and courage. Real innovation doesn't always come from experts. It doesn't always follow proper channels. Sometimes it comes from a clerk who reads reports carefully, thinks about problems deeply, and has the courage to act when he sees a solution. The bureaucracy said his modification was illegal. The experts said he lacked credentials. The regulations said he needed approval, but soldiers in combat said it saved their lives. In the end, that's the only credential that matters. 127 men came home because a hardware store clerk from Iowa couldn't sleep one night in September 1944. They came home to wives, children, futures. Their descendants number in the thousands now, all because someone broke the rules when the rules were wrong. That's not just military history. That's a lesson about courage, about seeing what needs to be done and doing it, regardless of what the manual says. David Marshall never sought recognition, but his legacy endures every time a soldier flips a coupled magazine and keeps fighting. Sometimes the most important innovations come from the most unlikely heroes. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ignore the people who tell you something is impossible. Marshall proved it's not impossible. It's just illegal, until it saves lives. Then it becomes essential.